Every so often, something happens in my study of the occult. I'm reading about Russian occult at the moment, and Slavonic magic. That blows my mind. That absolutely blows my mind. Now, I'm a firm believer in passive magic, and that's the video I made last week about CERN in Switzerland. That people are saying it's a place of sorcery and all this stuff. I don't know about that. I can't tell for sure, but I think that stuff will happen automatically and passively just by the actual what's going on there. Now, this video is about the occult of Chernobyl. Now, that may seem like a very strange thing, but there is a powerful and gigantic passive magical aspect to the nuclear disaster in 1985 that took place in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now, I was looking at some books on Slavonic magic, and unfortunately, we have good records up until the Soviet Union. And then, as usual, Bolsheviks being what they were, they destroyed everything and wiped everything out. But two things, there are scattered things remain. There's pamphlets that have been survived. There's testimonies of mainly aristocrats who escaped, and there's some other books and academic studies so on been done by some people. But it's a very interesting thing how the Bolsheviks basically sought to eliminate the occult and replace it with their more realism. They saw the occult as being bourgeois and decadent, and there's a lot of truth to that because things like theosophy, spiritualism, mediumship, and so on, and even things like divination, although tarot cards were relatively unknown in the Soviet Union for a long time, which is surprising because in the original deck the emperor looks very much like a Russian Tsar in the traditional dress. And so the Bolsheviks wiped it out, but the Bolsheviks were extremely interested in the occult. Now, directly and passively. Now, I have this belief that if you try to take on the occult and take it down, it will take you down. And that's why I think a lot of these people who go around trying to dismiss it and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of lies goes on there. I don't think Harry Houdini thought the occult was nonsense, not for a minute. And I don't think Lovecraft did either. I think that those things about them exposing the occult was a cover story. And I'll tell you that the Bolsheviks very much knew that it was going on. Now, before I go into that a little bit deeper, let me talk about Chernobyl, right? Now, many people are aware that the term Chernobyl is also the word for wormwood, which is a plant used in a lot of witchcraft and magic. It's also mentioned in the Bible, ironically enough. And Chernobyl is basically translates as wormwood, the place of wormwood. It's basically where they built the power plant. It was basically an empty landscape, basically very much a witching landscape. And the whole city and everything was built there for this massive complex to serve the Chernobyl power plant. Now, what we do know about Slavonic magic, which has been sadly totally wiped out, in Russia, it's survived much better in the Balkans and places like that. And in Hungary, where shamanism has survived, and Poland too, is that there are two magical terms of incantation that are used. These are very similar to abracadabra, the same kind of idea, right? The first one is chur, C-H-U-R, and that means to bind the demon. So in Slavonic magic, when you want to bind a demon, you go chur. It means like keep him out of magic circle, keep the demon at bay, chur. The other word is to summon a demon, an entity called the Queen of Serpents, which is a demonic female entity that spews toxins and spews fire. And guess what the incantation is? You guessed it, Chernobyl. Now, I literally fell off my chair when I read that last night, about 2 o'clock in the morning. That's absolutely quantified. you can look, well, you won't want to look it up. I'm not going to give you the names of all the books I have because I spent a fucking fortune compiling them. And if I ever write it down myself, I will cite the resources, but I can tell you for a fact the two words are Chur and Chernobyl. Now, you look at the Chernobyl site, it was basically one of the great masterpieces, like the Volga Dam, of the Soviet Revolution. It was to prove that technology was triumphant, that the revolution was triumphant, and technology is everything. Now, it was built on a plane of witchcraft, okay, for starters, the Plane of Chernobyl. It was named after wormwood, which is a witch's herb, and also we now know that it's also a demon summoning incantation to bring forth the Queen of Serpents. If you look at what's happened to Chernobyl thing, when the meltdown of the reactor happened, a long pool of concrete, highly radioactive concrete, fell down through the different floors and left a giant snake. And at the end of it is a thing called the elephant's foot. And the elephant's foot is probably the most dangerous thing human beings have ever created on this planet. It's so highly, accidentally, it's so highly radioactive that this elephant's foot is, if you can't even photograph it properly, you get in there for a second, you run out. But it's apparently in recent times it's become decreasingly radioactive. But you look at the secondary sarcophagi they've built over the reactor just to contain this thing. This is the serpent that they conjured up. This is passive magic. The Bolsheviks conjured up. Now this brings us to the other thing. Did they discount magic? Not at all. You had like the Bolsheviks were very interested in the occult in terms of getting into people's brains and mind control. Gorky, the Soviet social realist artist who was very involved in using art in order to program people to accept the Soviet philosophy, was highly interested in, as were many early other Soviets, including top KGB people, as the NKPD back then, in using the occult and using things that were developing around that time, like hypnosis, in order to mind control people. So Sovietism and socialism was built on the idea that it doesn't matter what the people want to believe, we'll make them believe through any means possible. Propaganda is good enough, but what they really sought to use was the occult. What they really wanted to use was magic. And of course their sorcery was poor quality, and it failed. It failed in two ways. One, they couldn't contain the people anymore. Everyone knew it was bullshit. Secondly, because it was based on a lie. And secondly, there was an occult war that took place prior to the Soviet Revolution. We had the deterioration and psychic breakdown of the Romanov family. We had the arrival of people like such as Rasputin, and the Romanov castle, or the Winter Palace, it was basically a shrine to occultism and witchcraft. They were desperately trying to offset a curse that was set for that President Nicola and Alexandra the Tsar and Tsarina, that they would be destroyed, and he would be basically the reincarnation of Peter or Job, the long-suffering. It's very interesting stuff. The Soviets and the Russians and the occult stuff is really fascinating, but it's a huge subject. It's taken me a while just to even get this far into it. A lot of it is very badly translated documents and books, and also there are Western sources, and they tend to be extremely academic, and they put things down like, oh, it's just a coincidence that it's Chernobyl and this kind of thing. But it is worth going into, and we'll be exploring this topic further. So when people... also, another thing about Chernobyl is, you know I've written a book called Walpurgis Night. And there's a strange history of things happening on Walpurgis Night. Basically, the National Socialists, another version of socialism, launched its existence on Walpurgis Night in the weekend of Walpurgis Night, Beltane, in Munich in 1919. Hitler, the Witch King of the National Socialists, the Black Hexon Witch King, he took flight to his mountains on Walpurgis Night in 1945. Now, lo and behold, it turns out in 1995, the World Wide Web was launched by CERN on Walpurgis Night, April 30th. But more interestingly, the Soviet news agency took until April 30th to make an official announcement to the world and the Western media and their own media when TASS announced that the Chernobyl reactor had gone into meltdown, and a critical situation was now facing Europe. And these things don't happen by accident. That's passive magic. This is what makes me worry a little bit about CERN. This is what makes me concerned about CERN, is that although the people in there, and a lot of them, funny enough, the early founders, a lot of them were, if not commies, were commie sympathizers from the UK and stuff like that. People connected to the Cambridge Five, a very dubious bunch under the guise of Lord Rothschild. Now, all these names I know keep coming back, but here we have it. Absolute quantifiable proof of passive magic in terms of the Chernobyl event. They created a demon called the Queen of Serpents, which actually manifested as this long string of molten, highly radioactive concrete that culminated in the most dangerous object, in a sense, the tongue of the serpent, the elephant's foot at the bottom of the corridor, that's so radioactive that cameras even melt when they come near it, and is contained in a giant sarcophagi, which is essentially a magic triangle to hold a demon. So basically they've gone from Chernobyl to Chur. Now I looked up Chur, and see if there's any, because I knew there was a city in Switzerland called Chur, and I wanted to see if there was any connections to CERN. It's on the exact opposite side of Switzerland. Chur is on the exact, couldn't be further away from Geneva and CERN. But interestingly enough, it does have some kind of powerful occult connections. One of them being H.R. Geiger, the brilliant but very strange artist who we know from the likes of the movie Dune and from Alien. And a remarkable artist, but his stuff is, he's even done his own version of the Necronomicon. His stuff is definitely occult and, demonic in nature. And but he comes from Chur. So where the Bolsheviks tried to destroy magic and they went to Chernobyl, they shouted Chur and they ended up with Chernobyl. And then you tell me that magic and the occult isn't real? It is. Bye.